Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
A young man walked along a country road one warm evening in August after a long, enjoyable day. A day of relaxing and doing nothing, which he didn't often get to experience. Willoughby had spent the morning resting in a sunny rickyard. When it got too hot, he moved to an orchard, where he lay on the cool grass and looked up at the apple leaves against the sky. Now that the day was cooler, he wandered around, enjoying the scenery and thinking about the nice day he'd had. He had already had 5 such days, and he had 15 more left before he had to go back to London and work for another year. He came to a gate on the right side of the road. Behind it, there was a path going up a grassy hill. Some sheep were eating at the top of the hill, and their shadows stretched down almost to his feet. The road and the path were both new to him, but he decided to take the path because it looked greener. He hopped over the gate lightly and started whistling a happy tune. The sheep stopped eating and looked at him with surprised eyes. Then they all ran away, making a lot of noise. When Willoughby reached the top of the hill, he saw a young woman sitting on a stile at the other end of the field. As he walked towards her, he noticed that she wasn't what people usually call a lady, which made him happy because he had some bad experiences with refined women before. He thought this girl might be okay with skipping the formalities of saying hello, so he decided to chat with her. Since she didn't move to let him pass, he stopped and smiled at her. She looked back at him with dark eyes and laughed, showing her white, healthy teeth. "Do you want to come over?" she asked in a friendly way. "I'm sorry, I can't without bothering you," he replied. "Don't you think you're better off where you are?" the girl said. "You mean because I'm looking at you?" "Well, maybe I am," he joked. The girl laughed again, but then climbed down into the field. Leaning on the gate, she said to the young man, "No, I don't want to ruin your walk. Were you maybe going to Beacon Point? It's very pretty that way." "I wasn't going anywhere specific," he said. "Just exploring, you know. I'm new to this area." "How funny. I'm new here too. I only came down last Friday to stay with my aunt in Horton." "Are you staying in Horton?" Willoughby said he wasn't staying in Horton, but at Pavy Cross Farm in the other direction. "Oh, that's Mrs. Payne's place, right? My aunt talks about it. She takes in people for the summer, doesn't she? I guess you're from London, right?" the girl said. "And I guess you're from London too?" Willoughby said, recognizing her accent. "You're smart," the girl laughed. "Yes, I am. I'm here for a holiday because I was so tired from work and the hot weather. I don't look sick, do I? But I was, because it was really hot in our workrooms last month. Tailoring is tough work, especially in hot weather." Willoughby suddenly became more interested in her. He had once thought about socialism and believed that women should work hard too. He had been hurt by a woman before and thought it was better for women to work hard instead of breaking hearts. He felt friendly towards this working girl and walked over to her side of the stile to show he approved of her. She turned to face him, leaning on the bar, and the sunset made her face look beautiful. Maybe she knew how nice the light was because she took off her hat, letting the golden light touch the ends of her rough hair. At that moment, she looked nice against the backdrop of the beautiful Southshire view. "You really are a tailor?" Willoughby asked with concern. "Yes, I am. I've been one since I was 14. Look at my fingers if you don't believe me," she said. holding out her hand. He took it, as expected. Her fingers were worn and dirty from sewing, but her hand was soft and not unattractive. She looked at his fingers holding hers. "It's clear you haven't done any work," she said, sounding partly impressed and partly jealous. "I guess you're fancy, right?" "Oh, yes, I'm really fancy," said Willoughby, not seriously. He thought about his £130 salary and mentioned his job at the British and Colonial Banking House, but she didn't seem to understand much. She still thought he was a gentleman. "Well, at least you're a gentleman. I've always wanted to be a lady. It must be nice to wear fancy clothes and not have to work all day," she said. Willoughby thought it was cute of her to say that. It reminded him of when he was a child and thought kings and queens put on their crowns first thing in the morning. He felt even friendlier towards her. "If being a gentleman means not having to do anything," he said with a smile, "then I'm not one. Life isn't easy for me, just like it isn't easy for you. That's why we should enjoy the moment, don't you think? So, would you kindly show me the way to Beacon Point, since you say it's so pretty?" She didn't need much convincing. As they walked together through the fields, where the evening was slowly turning to night and white moths were starting to come out, she asked him lots of personal questions. He didn't feel comfortable answering most of them, but she didn't mind. Instead, she told him all about herself and her family. He found out her name was Esther Stables, that she and her family lived in Whitechapel, that her dad was hardly ever sober, her mom was always sick, and that she was staying with her aunt who ran the post office and shop in Orton Village. He also learned that Esther wasn't happy with her life in general. She didn't like being at home, found the countryside really boring, and was happy to have met him. But what he realized most when they said goodbye was that he had spent a couple of nice hours chatting nonsense with a girl who was simple, honest, and didn't act all fancy like rich ladies do. He and Esther became friends easily, like kids playing together before they learn about rules. They said goodnight, talking about maybe meeting again. Usually, Willoughby enjoyed a late breakfast when he was in the countryside, taking his time and reading a book while he ate. But the morning after meeting Esther, he didn't feel like reading. Her face kept popping into his mind, and he figured the only way to get rid of it was to see her again. Needing some tobacco, Willoughby decided to head into Orton. Esther had mentioned that he could find tobacco and everything else at her aunt's place. He found the post office, one of the first houses on the street in the widely spaced village. In front of the cottage was a small garden full of old-fashioned flowers, and there was a larger garden on one side with apple trees, raspberry and currant bushes, and 6 beehives on a bench. The shop's windows were partly covered by sun blinds, but you could still see inside to the jumble of goods on display. Lemons, yarn, buttons, sugar cones, pipes, and tobacco jars. A letter box was fixed low on one wall, and over the door hung a sign that read, "Stamps and Money Order Office" in black letters on white enamel. Inside the shop was cool and dim. Another glass door at the back let Willoughby see into a small sitting room, and through a low, square-paned window, he could see the sunny landscape outside. He could make out the heads of 2 women against the light. The young girl from yesterday, Esther, and her aunt with her cap. It was the aunt who got up from her work when the doorbell jingled and came to help Willoughby. But Esther, with a meaningful look in her eyes and her finger pressed to her smiling lips, followed silently behind. Her aunt heard her footsteps. "What do you want here, Esther?" she asked with a disapproving tone. "Get back to your sewing." Esther signaled to the young man discreetly and slipped out into the side garden. He found her there after he had finished his purchases. She leaned over the hedge to speak to him as he passed by. "My aunt is quite strict," she said apologetically. "I think she'd prefer if I didn't talk to anyone at all." "Did you get home safely last night?" Willoughby asked. "What did your aunt say?" "Oh, she asked me where I'd been, and I told her a bunch of lies." Then, realizing that her words might not sit well, Esther quickly added, "She's really tough on me. I couldn't tell her I'd been with a gentleman, or she'd never let me go out alone again." "And will you be waiting at that same stile every evening?" Willoughby asked clumsily, not really caring if he saw her again or not. Now that he was with her, he was surprised he had spent so much time thinking about her that morning. Yet, her eagerness to meet him again did flatter him a bit. "I can't come tonight, unfortunately," Esther exclaimed. "It's Thursday, and the shops here close early. I have to keep my aunt company. But tomorrow? I can be there tomorrow. Will you come?" "Esther!" scolded a stern voice, and her aunt appeared through the raspberry bushes. "What are you doing, keeping the gentleman waiting like this?" She was polite to Willoughby, but angry with her niece. "We don't need any of your fancy city manners here," Willoughby heard her say as she led Esther away. He wasn't exactly sad to escape from Esther's overly friendly gaze, and he enjoyed spending the evening reading a book, managing to forget about her completely this time. Even though he thought of her first thing in the morning, he decided wisely that he wouldn't meet her again. But as the day went on, it felt long. Why shouldn't he meet her, after all? But by tea time, he decided again not to go. Then, he hurriedly drank his tea and headed towards the stile. Esther was already there, waiting for him. She looked even more colorful with excitement, and her reddish-brown hair had lovely golden highlights. He couldn't help but admire how her hair waved and curled, like a young lamb's fleece. Her neck was smooth and creamy, and when she lit up with joy at his arrival, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was actually a good and nice girl. He suggested they go down into the little forest on the right, where they wouldn't be bothered by people passing by. Sitting on a fallen tree, Willoughby started a light, playful conversation, the kind of flirting common among people of higher social classes. He just wanted to be pleasant and pass the time. But Esther took it differently. Willoughby had his hand resting, palm down, on his knee, and Esther, noticing a ring on his little finger, reached out to touch it. "That's a peculiar ring," she remarked. "Can I see it?" To free himself from her touch, he took off the ring and handed it to her to inspect. "What's that dark green stone?" she asked. "It's called a sardonyx." "What's it used for?" she inquired, turning it over. "It's a signet ring, used to seal letters. And there's a sort of king's head carved on it, and some writing too, but I can't make it out," she observed. "That's not the head of a king, even though it looks like it's wearing a crown," Willoughby explained. "It's actually the head and bust of a Saracen, who my ancestor fought against many hundreds of years ago in the Holy Land. And the words carved around it are our motto, Virtue vaunts it, which means virtue prevails." Willoughby may have felt a bit more dignified sharing this piece of family history, as Esther burst into uncontrollable laughter, much to his displeasure, when she jokingly suggested putting the ring on her own finger and asked, "Can I keep it?" He suddenly became annoyed. "That was just a joke," Esther quickly clarified, returning the ring to him, but his friendliness had vanished. He didn't feel like continuing their light-hearted conversation and declared it was time to leave. As he walked away, he angrily struck the heads off flowers and weeds with his cane. Esther walked alongside him in silence, a silence he soon noticed. Feeling a bit ashamed of his outburst, he made an effort to be friendly. "Well, here's your way home," he said, trying to be friendly. "Goodbye. We've had a nice evening anyway. It was pleasant down there in the woods, right?" He was surprised to see tears welling in her eyes and hear the genuine emotion in her voice as she said, "It was so wonderful down there with you until you got upset. What did I do to make you cross? Please say you forgive me." "You silly thing," Willoughby said, completely softened. "I'm not mad at all. There, goodbye." And foolishly, he kissed her. The next morning, he cursed his own foolishness. Remembering the kiss, he regretted it deeply. He worried that she might have taken it more seriously than he intended and would hope for more than he could offer. It seemed wise to avoid seeing her again. Despite only liking her a little and feeling somewhat afraid of her, he couldn't deny a certain allure about her. Was it in her dark, unyielding eyes or her bright red lips that might lead him to even greater mistakes? So, for 2 evenings in a row, Esther waited for him in vain. On the third evening, he told himself, somewhat relieved, that by now she had probably found someone else to fancy. It was Saturday, the second Saturday since he had left town. He spent the day around the farm, checking on the livestock and helping with the evening milking. Then, with his pipe refilled, he leaned on the west gate, watching the sunset and letting his mind wander into daydreams and fantasies amidst the colors of the sky. He watched as the colors shifted from gold to scarlet, then to crimson, and finally settled into somber purple tones, when suddenly he felt someone nearby. Turning around, he saw Esther, her eyes filled with both eagerness and anger. "Why haven't you come to the stile again?" she demanded. "You promised to come, and you never did. Why didn't you keep your promise?" "Why?" she persisted, her frustration evident as she stamped her foot. What could he say? Tell her she shouldn't be following him like this? Or admit, unfortunately, that he was somewhat relieved not to see her again? "Maybe you don't care about me anymore," she continued. "Then why did you kiss me?" Why indeed, thought Willoughby, bewildered by his own foolishness, yet somehow not entirely resistant to the idea of kissing her again. As he looked at her, she suddenly threw herself down on the hedge bank, tears streaming down her face. She didn't try to hide her tears, but simply rested one cheek on the grass, her eyes watering abundantly. Willoughby watched as the dry earth darkened under the moisture of her tears. It was his first time witnessing Esther cry like this, and it deeply unsettled him. He had never seen anyone cry so much before, and he worried she might be noticed from the nearby house. Quickly, he opened the gate. "Esther," he pleaded, "please don't cry. Come out here. and let's talk calmly." Guiding her through the gate because she couldn't see clearly through her tears, he took her hand, and they found themselves in a field of corn, walking along a narrow grassy path beside it, shielded by the hedgerow. "What's there to cry about just because we haven't seen each other for 2 days?" he began gently. "Esther, we're practically strangers. When we return home in a week or two, we'll hardly remember each other's names." Esther cried on and off, but eventually her tears stopped. "It's easy for you to talk about home," she said. "You have a home, don't you? But me? My home is like hell, with constant quarreling and cursing, and a father who beats us whether he's sober or drunk." "Yes," she added, noticing the disgust on Willoughby's face. "He beat me, even when I was sick, just before I left. I still have bruises on my arms. And now, going back there after meeting you, it'll be worse than ever. I can't bear it and I won't. I'll end it somehow, I swear." "But Esther, what can I do?" Willoughby asked, deeply moved and angry at her father and the world that caused such suffering for women. Though he himself had suffered at the hands of a woman, it hadn't hardened his heart but made it more compassionate. Yet, he felt the danger he was in. An inner voice urged him to leave, to seek safety, even if it meant seeming cruel or foolish. As they reached a point in the field where a tree jutted out across the path, he was relieved to withdraw his hand from hers, as they had to walk single file to go around it. Esther took a step forward, then turned to face him, holding out her hands. "Don't you care for me at all?" she asked softly. And suddenly, he was overcome with madness. He kissed her again and again, holding her close, pushing aside all thoughts of the consequences. But an hour later, as they stood by the last gate on the road to Orton, some of those consequences were already apparent. "You know I only have £130 a year," Willoughby told her. "It's not a very promising future for you to marry me." He had indeed proposed marriage, a surprising move for someone average like him. But overwhelmed with sorrow and guilt, it seemed the only way to make amends to Esther. Esther felt a sudden burst of joy. "Oh, I'm good at managing," she assured him, mentally planning to buy herself a black feather boa, a luxury she had long desired. Willoughby spent the rest of his holiday planning their return to London, the necessary legal steps, and the quiet suburb where they would live. And within 5 weeks of meeting Esther, they emerged from a church in Highbury as husband and wife. It was a sunny September day, and Willoughby, feeling recklessly happy, imagined he saw his joy reflected in the faces of the people passing by. With no one else to congratulate them, he warmly congratulated himself, while Esther's laughter filled the air.